Good morning and welcome to another review by me, the Omnivorous Reader. And now is the moment when most channels would have a pretty little dinkety sound and a set piece that they always play, and I don't really see the point. This isn't a serial soap opera on a television. You know who you're here for, or you don't, but you'll find out better from me telling you than from a dinkety little preview. However, there are elements of processing videos that I do wish I was better at, and one of them, I wish I knew how to post the photos. Editing is completely my bane. If I'm editing a YouTube or if I'm editing a GoPro of the ocean, I'm no good at it. I do wish I knew how to insert pictures, however, because today I am reviewing the very first trade paperback that I have reviewed on my YouTube channel. This is Resistance, written by Val McDermid and drawn by Kathryn Briggs. Val McDermid, of course, is a very well-known crime author. I'm pretty sure she's from the UK. Crimey, thrillery stuff. I've even read a couple of hers. I don't really remember them terribly well, but I have read them. I do remember thinking they were okay. Kathryn Briggs is a really, I would say, quite amazing artist who does comics or graphic novels, depending on how you want to look at it. And here's the problem. Omnivorous Reader reads omnivorously. One of the things I read a lot of is, in fact, trade paperbacks or graphic novels. The observant watcher will have noticed there is a whole shelf of them over here, and they are not by any means the only ones I have. Reviewing them has always seemed like something I wanted to wait for until I knew how to post pretty little images up in the corner so I could point at them while I'm talking about them, but I still don't know how to do that. And I've just finished Resistance and I want to review it. So you're going to have to cope with me just holding it up. And not only is it the first one I've reviewed on the channel, it is apparently the first new graphic novel I've read this year. This is a slow start for me in the graphic novels. Normally I read a lot of them. I used to be right into them. I used to read a lot every year. I was buying a lot when I was making good money, because often buying one is the only way to read it. I feel that graphic novels may be passing their heyday. The Neil Gaimans, the Grant Morrisons, the boys, Lock and Key, they're already out. And last time I stopped by a comic book store, there wasn't a lot of brilliance that I was seeing on the shelf. There wasn't a lot of innovation. There wasn't a lot of creativity. There were the same themes going over and over. Some of the last ones I bought, sorry chick, was actually Morning Glories, which is up there. It was okay. The overall concept started off well, but it was dragged down, I feel, as many comics are, by the fact that the art is often very uninspired. It's computer graphics. It lacks the vibrancy of having an actual artist doing it, and I think that shows up in the final product quite significantly. So I don't read as many as I used to. One thing I do like about new generation graphic novels, though, you can hardly call them comics anymore, can you? They're not. There's nothing comical about most of the ones that are coming out. They often take on social issues. So you've got a couple of great ones that have been about human rights abuses, things that would be hard or confrontational to do in images. Mouse, I think, actually won a mainstream literary award. I like that. I like that this method is being used to address more than bam, pack, kapow type superhero comics. I don't like how preachy and humorless some of the mainstream ones can be, though. I feel that we've lost a lot of the beauty that you get from some of the older ones. The graphic violence ones, violence is either your thing in comics or it's not. But at least they didn't take themselves too seriously. Preacher was violent but full of humor. Anyway, Anyway, rant about comics. I could rant about comics for an hour. Do you want me to? I could. So Resistance does suffer a little bit from that humorless element, but the subject is grim, and it's not badly done. It's just it is what it is. So we've got a global pandemic which is highly infectious, and it's brought about by a pathogen leaping the gap from human to animal, and fast evolving and very infectious. Does this sound familiar? However, the interesting thing about this is that it's based on a radio play that came out in 2017. So, though Resistance, the graphic novel, is from 2021, the original radio play was 2017. So, while this was written during the COVID pandemic, which would have been seriously interesting for the author and artist, the radio play was actually a bit prescient, wasn't it? Now, I'm not reading a lot into that. Pandemics have been the meat and potato themes of speculative fiction for ages, and I'm not saying that Val McDermid predicted the global pandemic. I've seen conspiracy theories that are trying to say that every speculative fiction writer out there ever foresaw it. It's just a theme, guys. Relax, calm yourselves down. Anyway, meat and potatoes theme. Get it? Get it? Well, if you've read this graphic novel, then you probably did get it. And if you didn't read this graphic novel and you can get your hands on it, I do recommend. It was good. So, interestingly enough, most of the online reviews I have seen for this graphic novel came from ARC readers. That's advanced reader copies. And I recognize something about many of those reviews. They often gave it high stars, 4 or 5. But the actual writing of the review tended to be a recap of the plot. Now, for a couple of years, I was right into the ARC reading. I was reading a lot of advanced reader copies in return for reviews. There's no obligation, but once you get the book and you read it, you want to review it, right? And I felt a sort of moral obligation to rate it well and review it extensively. And for some of them, it was hard. Some of them weren't very good books. Some of them were just books that weren't very my sort of book. And yet I wanted to review them. And in the advanced reader copy reviews for this book, I noticed that a lot of people were trying to give it more stars and a better review than they actually felt for the book. This is not an advanced reader copy, and I really did quite enjoy it. So, we've got a global pandemic, and there's elements of it that I really enjoyed. It started in the United Kingdom, Northumbria. I don't know anything about Northumbria. I don't think I've ever been there. I've only been to England a couple of times. I haven't been that far north. So I liked the setting. I enjoyed the fact that it started with United Kingdom setting, United Kingdom subjects. Things were happening, and that was good. We start off with Zoe, who is about to go to a music festival in Northumbria. She isn't excited about it at all. Actually, the very first page sets us up for where we're going, and I like the framework in this, and I like the different characterization. I liked how with one page, this graphic novel gave you so much you needed to know about it. Anyway, Zoe's a journalist, and she's having to leave her husband and her kids at home to go to this festival that we've already heard is going to be rainy, cold, wet, nasty. She's not particularly excited about most of the music either, but she's a journalist. That's how they make their money. Her husband, Sean, does renovations, and there's not been a lot of work for him, so the family are relying on her. I like the distinctive setting. I really thought the artwork did well for it. So Zoe goes around. She interviews the guy whose paddock it's being held in. She hangs out mostly with two friends of theirs, Sam and Lisa. They've got a sausage sandwich. I guess that's a UK thing. Sausage in a bun? I don't know. They sell sausages in bread from a shop at home during most of the time, but then they've got this caravan. They go set up a van at festivals and stuff and make a lot of money doing that, as you would. Their sausages actually sound pretty good. There's beef and beetroot, there's pork and apple. There's a whole heap of really interesting combinations. I think they'd do well in Australia. Zoe isn't that enthusiastic. Zoe is a vegetarian. She used to be heavily into the investigative journalism, but these days she more does interest pieces because that's what brings in the money. She desperately misses her investigative journalism days. She really loved doing that. One of her last investigative pieces had to do with the cruelty to animals on feedlots and part of the meat industry. So even though Sam does a lot of effort to ethically source his meat, Zoe still doesn't eat it. So that part was brilliant. At the festival, we see people are starting to get a little bit sick. They think it's food poisoning at first, but it ends up having some strange side effects. You've got a rash that comes on sometime later. And then eventually people start dropping dead. One of the first ones is a couple of the first ones are guys who performed at the music festival. Like this one, he had a strange name, I can't remember it. Will Honeywell, Honeypot, something like that. And then these other performers start coming up with rashes. I told you to have to put up with me holding it up to the screen. And I liked the way the artist did the rash. That image was pretty out front, but in order to show how extensively it's spreading and how fast, you have lots of different scenes of things happening, but in the background, if you look, you'll see individual characters showing signs of rash. So at this point, the story and the imagery are going together really well. Now, after a while, someone tracks the fact that all the people who got sick all had sausages from Sam and Lisa's sausage van. And I've got to say, I think that's a real stretch. I get that this is a plot element, it's part of the story, but having sat through the real pandemic and having worked in medical before, that they could chase it to a festival, sure, but they suddenly managed to identify the one crucial factor with everyone there was that they all had a sausage and a bun. It was a stretch. Anyway, so the reason it was there, it was part of one of the evolving themes of the story. It got Zoe on the scene because she was researching it, trying to clear her friends from having given people food poisoning. And that led her to feeling like an investigative journalist again. Once her editor just wants her to interview Sam the sausage man, or Sam the plague bearer, or whatever they're calling him those days. She wants to find where the infection comes from, and that leads her to the fact that Sam's meat supplier is actually buying meat from one place that is dodgy, and she goes there. So that's interesting. But by now, the plague is spreading everywhere. And at this point, I feel like the story really lost sight of what it was trying to do. Or maybe I stopped understanding what it was trying to do. It stopped telling a good, consistent story and went a bit blah. Technical term, blah. What was it trying to do? A lot of it seemed to be angry monologue at Big Pharma for refusing to fund more research into antibiotics, and that's why we don't have the antibiotics to combat this plague. Only that really didn't always make sense in the way it was presented, or a bit of an antibiotics resistance rant, but that kind of drops off and goes nowhere, and it didn't seem very relevant to the plot, honestly. I think the whole point about this particular pandemic in Resistance is that even if you had superhuman antibiotic from the gods, it wouldn't have controlled something that was that infectious and that fatal. So, yeah, not sure what she was trying to do with that one. Then you've got the animal cruelty and ethical carnivorism debate. I feel that should have been the main theme. And again, that sort of dropped by the wayside really, really fast. So we're told as readers, we watch as Zoe essentially discovers the way in which the disease jumps from animals kept under unhygienic, horrific conditions through to humans through fast mutation and the food chain. But then that goes nowhere. So yes, anyone in 2024 reading this is going to be thinking, hello, Wuhan food animal market. But she could have done more with that when she was writing it. I get that she didn't. It was before the pandemic. It's just this lightly outlined notion that really, it kind of crops up again once or twice, but it feels desultory. It feels like she didn't know what she was doing with it. It was just there. But Zoe does track down this animal farm. She does find out that all the animals there have got essentially a similar disease. I'm not going to go into how likely that is or is not to manifest the same in pigs as in humans. But it does give us a chance for some nice artwork on the part of the artist. I really like that image. It doesn't come across as well on the screen as on the page. Never mind. So Zoe basically uncovers all of that. No one in any position of authority seems interested, and though she blogs it, no one seems to pay any attention. And at the end of the book, everyone's still blaming Sam, which makes no sense and was just weird, and I didn't like it. And then we've got this ongoing rant that seems to be about the United Kingdom and Big Pharma, and I feel that used up space that could have been better used, to be honest. Now, the UK government part. Come on. No. Okay. I am not from the UK, so I could not really follow it. There wasn't that much of it, and it didn't really matter. But I think someone from the UK would enjoy the whole government thing better. They could probably understand it. At the end, this becomes really high fatality. None of the nations on Earth are coping. Whole nations are just dropping off the map. And we know this partly through Zoe, who is the journalist, but partly through another character that gets introduced that is a scientist working with infectious diseases. They create a conglomerate online of scientists from around the world, at least some parts of the world, and they all talk together online and share information. That doesn't help. Spoiler, the disease keeps progressing. The artwork. Let's talk about the artwork specifically. Some of the people who reviewed this didn't really like the black and white artwork. And in general, I kind of sympathize with them. Black and white isn't my favorite. I'm a child when it comes to graphic novels. I want color, I want innovation, I want shiny things. But some black and white is very effective. And here I really, really like the artwork. I thought it was strong, I thought it was effective, I thought it was confident in its own power of line and shading. I thought it really suited the subject matter. Can't see how colour would have enhanced my reading experience of watching people vomit at a music festival. I've seen that in real life and the colour doesn't add to it, trust me. I can see how some people would find it clunky. But as I myself am a recreational artist, I really admired the strong lines. I liked the at times simplistic images. I thought they were good. And though they appear as simplistic, I think they are far from simplistic. I think they're very effective. Take this example of the newsreader. Yes, that's clunky outline, but I think it's trying to make a point with the fact that it's being watched on television. And it's far removed from the point. I could go into a lot of analysis of the artwork, and I'm going to try not to. However, some of the things that I really liked, I really liked the way she did images. Kathryn Briggs brings out graphic novels, and I think several of them about birds. I think I really liked the way she imaged animals and birds in particular. Here we've got an image from the pigs and the crows that are on the field where the music festival started spreading the disease, and it very lightly touches on how, since it's a zoonotic disease, the animals spread it around the world. There's even a mention of fish spreading it later, which I think is a stretch, but okay. One of the things I really like is the way the artist, Kathryn, does backgrounds. So in a comic like this, you're going to have a lot of info dumping. You can't get away from it. And Val McDermid herself doesn't primarily write for comics. She writes for proper, normal fiction novels. So you're going to have to info dump because there's a lot of information. But when you've got an info dump page, what Kathryn Briggs does is she gives you this really elaborate background. So at the same time that you're absorbing this information about 17 other people dead who were at solstice, you've got these maps with scraps of newspaper, map of the UK, small things like spreadsheet type squares in the background, things that make it feel richer and make the reading experience more interesting. And I think black and white does this actually much better than colour would have. If you were trying to do this with colour, here we've got another one, again info dumping, but you've got all that really nice drawings of blood cells and disease proliferation in the background. Now, if you tried to do that with colour, all the red in the red blood cells would completely obscure the text. As it is, you can focus in and out of the drawing and the text, and really, as we heard there in the headlines, there's been a dramatic fall in the number of reported cases of the mystery bugs that's been sweeping the country. We don't really need to enjoy those words. We need to know that it's happening, but it's not an enjoyment in and of itself. And this method of art really, really suits it. So another thing she does that I really like is she uses framing to denote the experience. So here we've got a bit of a relationship argument happening here. Zoe feels like an investigative journalist for the first time in years while she's covering the disease. Her husband Sean is worried about their kids. He wants to take them to a remote spot to his aunt so that they're not going to be in the centre of, I think it's London? It's a town anyway, an English town. Get away from the disease, perhaps save the family and the kids. Zoe doesn't want to go anywhere. She wants to keep doing what she's doing. And so you've got this dissonance between them really nicely reflected in that framing. And you've got this shading that at first glance seems very random and odd. But I think that sort of shading in this place denotes the fact that Zoe is slowly fading away from her family and into her role. I think she later regrets, by the way. So you've got a lot of really, really nice artwork. At the end, at various points during the story, you've got nice framing, but the end has particularly nice framing. You've got this beautiful artwork, and you get a feeling of an illustration from a medieval manuscript to indicate the mythological element of the ending is the ending. You know you're fading back. You know you're not going to know the end of all these characters, but that framing makes it almost into story type medieval image motif. So in these terms, I thought the artwork was great, and there's some really, really strong and strange images throughout that suit the theme of a strong, strange time. So yeah, kudos to Kathryn Briggs for doing great artwork for this novel. I'm not being paid for this, by the way. I just really appreciate it. Those are the high points of the novel, which I enjoyed. There are negatives though. The cons for me were the biggest one, and I read this quite fast, reading it through continuously, I didn't feel that the artwork and the story always meshed that well. At times, I think the graphics struggled to integrate the text, and I think the artist did a great job. But it had that feeling of an author who's used to writing with words, and she can maybe visualize a few set pieces of what she wants things to look like, but she isn't visualizing this story in images, she's visualizing it in words, which is how she normally writes. Visualizing an occasional image in your story is fine. Visualizing a landscape works, but visualizing continuous images is a very unique skill set, and great comic book authors can do it. Not everyone can. I don't feel like Val McDermid did a terrible job with that, but I don't think she did a great job. This story in many places felt like a story that was being conveyed with words, and the images were added on. You've got a few points where the images is conveying the story as well as the words, or better, or they're working well together, like this image here, which conveys the scene in a way that I'm pretty sure McDermid would normally have used words to convey the chaos of hallucination. But overall, it was good, but not great for that reason. Now, the story could have been enhanced significantly by dialing down the ranty themes. I think that the ranty themes are more suited to words than images, and you've got too many rants. You've got 3 or 4 rants, and none of them really integrate terribly well with the story, and at least 2 of them don't ever go anywhere. You could have dialed down on the rants significantly. Back to the artwork. Kathryn Briggs does some amazing characterizations. She draws females really, really well. Her ability to convey individual females, her ability to convey emotion, all really good. I love the fact that they made the primary female scientist was wearing a headscarf. That made for some truly excellent images, and it made for the fact that you could instantly identify her. Most of the female characters were very identifiable, and I'm afraid males are not her forte. They were hard to tell apart. She has essentially 1 or 2 types. She has young male with beard, young male without beard, and middle-aged guy. Eventually, you needed to rely on the context of the story, or someone saying Sam or Sean, to know which male it was. That's my criticism. I couldn't do it anywhere near as well as her. I outright admit it, but I didn't know who the guys were. I'm sorry, but I really just didn't. Another thing that I think Kathryn Briggs is really good at, drawing birds. I think she isn't really good at drawing noses. Especially toward the end, it seemed like genetic diversity was not high on Earth because everyone had exactly the same nose. It was drawn with big here, 2 big nostrils, and the same rather snouty. Was she trying to suggest humans are pigs? But this nose basically is the same nose pretty much throughout. Doesn't matter if it's a guy, doesn't matter if it's a girl, doesn't matter which girl it is, it's basically the same nose over and over again. The only time that really varies is in profile, some of them up tilt and some of them are straight. If I had read it slower, perhaps I wouldn't have noticed that. If I didn't have a childhood trauma memory of learning to draw noses, I probably wouldn't have noticed it either. But now you too will notice it if you read this comic. You're welcome. What else? About the males. There is a sequence toward the end. It's a pretty good image. Where is it? 2 guys standing watching London burn. Quite nice. Very suitable to the story. Am I meant to know these guys? I don't. I can't tell them from any of the other guys I've seen. And they're not one of the guys I thought they might be because that guy's already dead. So who are they? I don't know. Do I care about them? No, I don't. Nice frame watching London burning. Characterization absent. Purpose in story unknown. The end of the story, both in artwork and in ignoring the noses, and in story, is pretty good. So we've got post-apocalyptic peaceful. There's estimates there's only around 2 million people left on Earth. Our surviving protagonists are living in a bucolic remote location. There's only 7 of them in the UK. Australia apparently did quite well. The government closed the borders and nothing could come in. Thank you, Val. I appreciate the vow of confidence. In the hindsight of the COVID, if you gave kudos to Australia, you should have given double kudos to New Zealand. They did even better than us in terms of controlling their borders. But in fact, in COVID, that is kind of what happened. A lot of Australia's borders shut. We're an island. There wasn't a lot of way to get around it like there was in places in Europe. So our isolation was high and our death rate was low. So the end summed up by a couple of million people left on Earth, beautiful imagery, nice frames. Our group of 7 are surviving. How long they'll survive with that lower number, who knows? There are days after a 9-hour shift where the idea of there only being 7 people in my entire human circle sounds idyllic. I don't mean that. I know, I'd hate it. I'm old, my resistance isn't high, I probably wouldn't survive a real pandemic. Or at least not another pandemic. I don't actually want it to happen, but the ending does feel kind of soothing rather than kind of depressing, and it could have been made either way. So kudos to the author and artist for making the ending feel soothing and, if not hopeful, at least not catastrophic. So, yeah. Those are my rather extensive thoughts on Resistance, a trade paperback that's brought out by a company called The Welcome Collection. And it could be that that's why not a lot of people seem to have heard of this comic that's actually been out for a good few years. Welcome Collection seems to have a bit of a mission to spread knowledge about science and information. So maybe it's not one of those sexy, well-known Dark Horse Marvel type distributor. It's a Profile Books, whatever that is. Anyone watching from the UK might be able to tell me a bit more about this. And of course, the original radio was broadcast in the UK as well, part of BBC Radio 4's Dangerous Visions. I'd like to seek that out and hear more of it, actually. I bet it made a pretty good radio play. And it makes a pretty good graphic novel. And I'm not going to say it's the best one I've ever read, but it's quite significant. And in terms of real type social issue graphic novels, this is one of the better ones I've read. I think I'd probably even put it ahead of one like Mouse, where the artwork did get very repetitious. And the artwork stands in its own right on this one, in the way that the artwork for a lot of social issue graphic novels doesn't. Because a lot of social issues do require 2 people sitting around talking at each other, and there's only so many ways you can draw that to make it interesting. And Kathryn Briggs does an excellent job of making 2 people talking or info dumps interesting in terms of her background art. So yes, thank you for watching. I hope I've convinced you that if you like graphic novels, you might enjoy Resistance. I hope I've convinced you that if you generally don't like graphic novels, but like mainstream fiction, you might be interested in this one. And as always, like, comment, subscribe, all that algorithm stuff. And I hope one day I figure out how to post images better, and then I can start reviewing all this shelf that you can see back here. Have a great day.